Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be going through the Seamless EVPN-VXLAN Stitching Underlay Learning Byte. All right, so here is the topology for our learning byte, and there's a few things that we need to go through. But first, let's go through the addresses we see here on the left. We have the loopback addresses for spine 1, spine 2, leaf 1, and leaf 3. And those loopback addresses are going to be very, very important because the whole point of an underlay network is to distribute those loopback addresses so the overlay network can form. So keep that in mind. We'll want to see those addresses later in this learning byte when things are working as expected. And then we have the fabric link addresses, and that's in the 172.16.1.something/31 range. And you can see that here with the .1 on leaf 1, .0 on spine 1, .29, .30, .37, .38, .10, and .11. So keep that in mind. That'll be important because we'll be using those addresses to form our underlay BGP sessions. And then we have our host addresses, which aren't really important for this learning byte. There will be additional learning bytes that cover the overlay network as well as the configuration for Seamless EVPN-VXLAN Stitching. So those will be important with other learning bytes, but not terribly important for this learning byte, but they are there. And then we have the service provider links. You can see here, this is the 172.16.1.28 and .36 as well. And those fall within the fabric link addresses. And so with that, let's go ahead and configure this. Well, actually, first, before we get configuring, let's talk about the rest of the topology a little more. We have leaf 1, which acts as a leaf device, a router leaf, and it is connected to host 1. And you can see here it's connected using XE004. And then leaf 1 also then connects into spine 1 using the XE000 interface with the 172.16.1.1 address. And then spine 1, it uses the XE00 interface to connect to leaf 1, and the XE003 interface to connect to the service provider network. And something else to point out is notice the autonomous system numbers here. We have AS65123 for spine 1, AS65124 for leaf 1. Now that'll be very important because we will be using eBGP for the underlay network, and so we have to specify these autonomous system numbers as we are configuring those sessions. So those will be very, very important. And then we have the service provider network. And then we have spine 2, which connects to the service provider network and also to leaf 3. And it uses AS65125. And then we have leaf 3 that uses AS65126, connects into host 2 as well as spine 2. And then notice how spine 1 and leaf 1 are a part of a different data center. They're in DC1. And then spine 2 and leaf 3 are a part of DC2. And so the whole point of what we're doing here is we're going to be creating the underlay network that will facilitate the overlay network, which will then facilitate the seamless EVPN-VXLAN stitching and will allow these hosts to communicate that are in different data centers. So this is a data center interconnect technology is what we're getting at here. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump to the CLI of spine 1. So that'll be this guy here and get this going. All right, so here is the spine 1 device. And so what we need to do here is, as I talked about earlier, is we are going to configure the underlay network. So let's jump into configuration mode, and this is going to be BGP. So protocols, BGP, need to name the group. We'll call this DC1 underlay. So this will be the underlay network that is a part of DC1. So that includes spine 1 and leaf 1. And so we're using eBGP, so we'll set the type to external. And then we need to specify the peer AS. So this would be the autonomous system of leaf 1. And that is 65124. And then our local AS, so this would be the autonomous system of spine 1, 65123. And then we set the neighbor, so this would be leaf, the interface address of leaf 1. We can see that there. Now, if we form a BGP session with leaf 1 like this from spine 1, we're not going to be passing any routes. And so we have to configure an export policy to export that loopback route from spine 1 into the underlay fabric. So let's go to policy option, policy statement, and we'll say loopback export. And so we need to say, let's say term 1 from interface loopback, then term 1 accept, then accept. There we go. And so there's our policy. Now we need to apply that, right? So let's go back to the BGP protocol, and our group, recall, was DC1 underlay, and we'll set the export for that, that export policy. And so right now, any sessions that spine1 forms with this BGP group, which is just going to be leaf1 in our scenario, is going to, well, spine1 is going to advertise its loopback address to. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and configure the next underlay network. So this will be the underlay network with the service provider network. And so we're going to call this DCI underlay. And that I kind of looks like a 1, so keep in mind that this is DCI and not DC1. And so just something to keep in mind as we go about this. Okay, so we're going to set type external, and then we need to set the PRAS. And so this will be the autonomous system of the service provider network, which is 65100. And then our local AS, again, is 65123. And then we need to set the neighbor address, 72.16.1.30. And we need to set the export policy. Again, we're going to be exporting our loopback address. And so that's our BGP configuration for spine1. Let's go ahead and commit that. And then we'll jump to leaf1 and configure that BGP session. Okay, so here is leaf1. Let's jump into configuration mode. Okay, so again, it's going to be an external. Oops, I guess I have to get into the group next. DC1 underscore or dash underlay. Set type external. It is external or eBGP. Pair AS. Recall that the pair AS for spine1 is 65123. The local AS, recall, is going to be 65124. And then the neighbor is going to be 172.16.1.0. And then we have to configure a routing policy to export the loopback address. And we haven't configured that yet, but let's go ahead and just configure the export policy here, and we'll create it. Just have to make sure we name it the same. And I almost named it wrong. From interface loopback, set term 1, then accept. And let's go ahead and commit and quit that. And so that's all we have to configure with leaf1. So let's go ahead and jump to spine2. And well, first let's actually exit the configuration with spine1. We're done configuring that. And let's go ahead and jump to spine2. All right, so here is spine2. Let's jump into configuration mode. And let's first configure that routing policy. Get that out of the way. From interface, the loopback interface. And then we accept it. So it's going to be accepting routes from that are attached to the loopback interface. And then let's go ahead and edit to BGP. And this will be, let's first configure the DC2 underlay network. So this will be between spine2 and leaf3. And of course, it's going to be external BGP again. And then the peer AS, recall 65126. And the local AS is 65125. And then the neighbor, and so this will be leaf3, 172.16.1.11. And that is that group. Oh, of course, we need to set the export policy. Okay, so that's that group. That's the group between the group for spine2 to leaf3. And let's configure the DCI underlay group. So this will be spine2 to the service provider network. And so it's going to be external BGP. The peer AS, of course, is going to be 65100. The local AS, again, is going to be 65125. And then the neighbor is going to be 172.16.1.37. Set the export to that export policy. So we'll export our local loopback address on spine 2. And that's that configuration. And so the next configuration will be leaf 3. So let's jump to leaf 3. Let's jump into configuration mode. And let's configure that, that policy first. Call it again LLO export. Set term 1 from interface, the loopback interface. And then we'll accept that. And then let's jump to BGP. BC2 underlays the group. Set the BGP type to external. We're going to say the peer AS is going to be 65125. And the local AS for leaf 3 is 65126. And then set the neighbor. That is going to be 172.16.1.10. That is the interface address for spine 2 that leaf 3 is connected to. And then we set the export to that export policy we configured. And this can take a few minutes, or rather, usually about 30 seconds for the BGP sessions to establish. But let's go ahead and see what we have. And it just established about 5 seconds ago from the look of the output. And you can see here that we are getting some routes. Perfect. We have the BGP session with spine 2 established, and we are getting some routes. So let's actually take a look at those routes. So route protocol BGP. Right, we can see we are getting some routes. We're getting the link route, that is the prefix for that connects to the service provider network. But you can see here we have the loopback address for spine 1, the loopback address for spine 2, and the loopback address for leaf 1. Now, since this is Seamless EVPN-VXLAN Stitching, we do not want this address. We're going to have to do something to stop that address from showing up. And so, but we're okay for now. We'll have to jump back into the configuration and do a few things. But we look at spine 2, Bgp Summary. We're having routes. Great. We see we're receiving 1 route from leaf 3, and then we're receiving 3 routes from the service provider network. Not BGP Summary. What was I thinking? I need to do show route protocol BGP. Okay, so you can see here that we do have the necessary routes. We have spine 1, we have leaf 1, and leaf 3. Now, we don't want leaf 1 though. That kind of breaks the whole idea of VXLAN stitching if leaf 1 shows up there. So we'll have to do something to fix that, of course. And then spine 1, we can do show BGP Summary. Things look good there. So route protocol BGP. And you can see here we have the necessary routes. Again, we don't want the loopback for leaf 3 showing up here. That's not good. And then leaf 1, show BGP Summary. And we have 4 routes. So route protocol BGP. And again, we have those routes, but we have the routes for spine 1, spine 2. We actually don't want spine 2 showing up here. And I don't know if I mentioned that with leaf 3, that we don't want spine 1 showing up. I think I actually forgot to mention that. But we don't want that showing up either. So we don't want spine 1 here, or spine 2 that is, and we don't want leaf 3. So let's just jump back to leaf 3 real quick, just to reiterate that. So we don't want spine 1 showing up in leaf 3, because we don't want a VXLAN tunnel establishing from a leaf in a data center, one data center, to a spine in a different data center, or a leaf in a different data center. That's what we want to avoid. And so we're going to have to make some changes there. So the first thing we want to do is we want to start tagging our routes with communities to actually show where they are coming from. And then we can use those communities to determine which routes we will import into the routing table. And so let's go ahead and jump back to leaf 1. And let's jump into configuration mode. And what we need to do here is we need to go to policy options and configure some communities. We need to configure communities for each loopback address. And so set community, and we're going to call this spine 1. And members, we're going to tag it with something, just something that it can be arbitrary, just as long as it's consistent. Okay, so spine 1 there. Let's do this again with leaf one, we'll call this, we'll say 4. And you can see here it's actually lining up with their autonomous system numbers. And so that's a good way to do it. So leaf 1. And then let's go ahead and go to spine 2. That's spine 2's autonomous system number, 65125. Spine 2. And then we need to do leaf 3. And so that is leaf 3 autonomous number. Let's go ahead and enter that in for leaf 3. And so you can see our communities here. Now, this is going to be the same on each device. So I'm just going to copy this and then go to each device and load that in. Save some time versus typing them all in. And then, so we did that on spine 1. Let's go to spine 2 and do that. Go ahead, do a load merge. And then let's do that on leaf 3 as well. Load that in. Okay, so we have that, the communities all set. Let's jump back to leaf 1. And what are we going to do here? Well, let's go to the policy statement, the loopback export policy statement, and let's attach it. So set term 1, then community add. We want to add the community of, and who is this? Leaf 1. And that will add the community to that. And then we need to configure a separate policy that will reject all other loopback addresses except for spine 1. And so we'll call this, let's say loopback underlay, because this is what we're accepting for the underlay network with loopbacks. So set term 1 from community, we want to say spine 1. And then we want to say we want to accept that route. And then we'll set a second term that rejects all other routes. And we need to jump to our BGP group and set that as an import policy. That is edit protocols, BGP group, BC1 underlay, set import. And what did we call that? We called that loopback underlay. Perfect. So we have the export, loopback export, that is just exporting, or rather is adding a community to our loopback address. And that's going to be leaf 1 for that community. And then we're only accepting routes that have the spine 1 community. Let's go ahead and commit that configuration and then jump to spine 1. And we need to do the same thing here. So edit policy options, or policy statement that is, and we'll get into our loopback export policy and set term 1, then community add, and it's going to be spine 1 community. Just this is spine 1. And then let's go up 1 and create a new policy. And what do we call that? Loopback underlay. And set term 1 from, okay, what are we accepting it from now? We want to accept the loopback addresses from leaf 1 and spine 2. So from community, say leaf 1, spine 2. Set term 1, then accept. Set term 2, then reject. So we want to, of course, reject all other routes. Then go to the BGP group, BC1 underlay, and set the import as that loopback underlay import. And we need to do that for the DCI underlay group as well. We'll set the import loopback underlay. And let's commit that configuration. And let's jump to spine 2 and do the same thing. So we have the policy statement, loopback export. We want to set term 1 to then community add, and we'll add the spine 2 community. So we're good there. So we're exporting the loopback address here, and we're going to be adding the spine 2 community. And then we need to configure a new policy statement, and we're going to call that loopback underlay, just like what we did on the other devices. And what do we want to do here? We want to set term 1 from community, which communities. So it's going to be spine 1 and, whoops, not and there, but spine 1 and leaf 3. Those are the two communities that we want to accept routes with those communities on spine 2. Then we'll accept those routes, and then of course term 2, then reject. And we'll go to the protocols BGP hierarchy, and we'll set group DC2 underlay to import with that loopback underlay policy statement. And the same thing with the DCI underlay. We want to import that loopback underlay statement. And so let's go ahead and commit the configuration there. And again, what that's doing is in the DC underlay, we're going to DC2 underlay, we'll be only accepting the loopback address from leaf 3. And then in the DCI underlay, we'll be accepting the loopback address from spine 1. Okay, so let's go to leaf 3 now. I'm going to do the same thing here. We're almost there. Then we'll verify what we have. So with leaf 3, let's go to the loopback export policy statement and set term 1 to add the community. And what are we doing? Leaf 3. We want to add the leaf 3 community to any route we're exporting here. And it's going to just add it to the loopback address or the route for the loopback address. And then we're going to configure that additional policy statement. Call that loopback underlay. Set term 1 from community, and which community? Only spine 2. Term 1, need to accept that. And then reject all other routes. And so what's going to happen here? We're going to, well, actually, let's go ahead and apply that to the BGP group. So import, and it's the loopback underlay. Okay, so what's going to happen here? We are going to export our loopback address here. So leaf 3 loopback address at the route that represents that is, and we're going to tag it with the leaf 3 community. And then we're only going to accept routes that are tagged with the spine 2 community. So let's go ahead and commit that. And then let's look at what we're having for the BGP routes. You can see here that it's changed. Recall last time this was receiving 4 routes and 4 routes were active. Now we're receiving 2 routes, 1 route is active. So that's different, right? Let's see if that's what we actually want. And perfect. This is the loopback address for spine 2. We only want the loopback address for spine 2. Okay, so let's jump to spine 2 and see what we have there. And I'm just going to look at the BGP routes here. We don't need to look at the BGP summary for this. And so here, okay, perfect. We have the loopback address for spine 1 and also the loopback address for spine 3. That's exactly what we want, because spine 1 and spine 2 will be acting as the interconnect gateway devices. And so let's jump back to spine 1. Look here, and okay, cool. This is what we want. Got the loopback address for spine 2 and the loopback address for leaf 1. So let's jump to leaf 1, see what leaf 1 shows. And great, we only have the loopback address for spine 1. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we should see. So right now we have the underlay network for our data centers. We have data center 1, data center 2 set up correctly. And so that does bring us to the end of this learning byte. In this learning byte, we demonstrated how to configure and verify the underlay network for seamless EVPN-VXLAN stitching. And something else I do want to point out is there will be other learning bytes that I am doing that will cover other topics with seamless EVPN-VXLAN stitching, such as the overlay network and the actual configuration of seamless EVPN-VXLAN stitching. So look out for those learning bytes as well. And as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.